This morning, we're going to begin to talk on some Father's Day issues. You may say, well, wait a minute. Aren't you a little premature there, Pastor? Well, I want to lean in. The Lord has just overwhelmed me this week. Just overwhelmed me with issues on masculinity as we approach Father's Day. Now, we got something really special next week that you're going to want to be here for. And I encourage you to be here for Father's Day. We're going to have a really good time encouraging men. Next week's going to be really mostly on encouraging men. Today I want to challenge you as men this morning. Now I want to give credit where credit is due. Dr. James Emery White is a pastor and professor. I can't remember the school he is a professor at. But I read some of his material, particularly some of his articles this week, and one of them was titled Men in Crisis. And in doing so, I felt led to title this. Now, this wasn't a message by him. This was simply something that was based on statistics, and I want to share a lot of it with you this morning. But I do want to give credit where credit is due in regards to stealing some of his material, or borrowing, I should say. And I want to ask you guys a couple questions. Now, ladies, I want you to sit back because I'm going to press into the men this morning. But I'm going to dovetail towards you because you have a big deal to do with the issue at hand and what we're talking about. So this is for everybody, but I'm going to try and lean in and try not to lash into us men too much, but to be kind and forthright as we dig into this. I want to ask you guys a couple of questions. And this is the way that Dr. Emery led into his article. I shared this with a group of guys yesterday, and it was really good. But it's this: men, would you rather look at pictures of women or be with a real woman? Would you rather be at home or the office? At work? At home? Would you rather play football or just watch it on TV? Now, golf, that's a no-brainer. Would you rather be a strong guy who works out at the gym or play a video game where you act like one on a TV screen? These are questions that were posed, and I posed to each of us, because men are in a crisis these days. Men are in a terrible way because a majority of men would rather sit and watch than do. There are, and if we're all honest, guys, there's probably been a season of your life where some of this rang true and some of it didn't. I can say that honestly as myself. There is a growing aspect within masculinity where men would rather sit and watch than do. We would rather sit and watch men play football than play it with our kids out in the yard. We'd rather be at the office than be at home. We would rather sit instead of do. And that is having bad ramifications on our culture. Americans, now this is not just men, but a good portion of the percentage will be spent on men. Men spend an average of 60 hours a week plugged into one of the four main digital devices: cell phones, smartphones, computers, televisions, tablets. 60 hours. That's daunting. Why? Because a man feels a lot safer in a video game than he does out in the real world. That's basically the reason. See, no one judges your performance on a football field when you're watching it on TV. Am I right, guys? Right? Nobody's outlifting you at the gym when you're just playing a first-person shooter on a TV. Right? See, men feel safer in these venues and areas because competition is a lot less meaningful or competitive in these digital arenas. We can get affirmed in our video game skills or in our ability to remember stats about a player than our performance physically in an area outside of the four walls of a building. Listen to these statistics in the video game industry. In 2012, Call of Duty Black Ops 2 made 50 million in sales in the first 24 hours. How many ladies do you know who play Call of Duty Black Ops? Some of you are like, I don't even know what that is. It's the leading video game played by males these days. First 24 hours. The following year, 8,300 stores across North America, which is very low, by the way, in North America, had a midnight opening of Grand Theft Auto 5, taking in $80 million in the first day. Went on to rack up $1 billion in only 3 days after, the fastest sales of any media to record, beat any movie to date at that time. Now, you may say, that's all poppycock. I don't know what that is, Tommy. This is what young men are into these days. This is what they're spending their money on. This is what the culture is shifting towards. What's the old saying? Follow the money, right? Follow the money. That's where the money's going. This is staggering. In 2013, the worldwide revenue for the gaming industry, including mobile games and smartphones and stuff like that, $66 billion. That's a $300 billion increase from 2012. Now, I know these statistics are a little low. All of this was put into a book written by a Stanford University professor named Mr. Zimbaro. I don't know if I got his name right. He's pretty well known for a 1971 prison survey that he did on men in prison. All of this I'm taking out of this article. He argues in his book that we have to take into account other trends that are radically altering male identity, such as absent fathers, unemployment, lack of exercise, and lack of positive male role models. The work environment has changed men. Now listen to this. Men who used to work in factories and laboratories and office and drawing offices are now desk-bound their entire adult lives. This has been a drift away from what is known as STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math, professions in favor of service industries and so-called creative industries. Western males are more happy to use machines than they were in the third world to make them. Right? Isn't that what you see? Men are more likely to use a machine to actually design and structure them these days. All of this is having a big effect on men. In 2013, Pornhub was the 35 most visited website, get this, from ages 6 to 14 years old. That is crazy. And this is all my intro, but Zimbaro also points out in the profound sweeping change in American society, there he believes is an erosion of the Protestant work ethic. With it, the old ideas of responsibility and self-respect. The concept of the male breadwinner has gone. Sometimes heralded as a triumph of feminism, it is not. It is pointed to a male view that has been disrespected and replaced with anything equally motivating or self-centering. Meaning that, look, the concept what used to define men as just being the breadwinner, which was the lowest common denominator, okay? If you were considered masculine, if you just showed up to work and at least provided for your family, at least that was, when I was growing up, that was held onto by most men, finito. That itself is even gone. Would you not agree that masculinity is in crisis? It is, and here's the deal, if the church doesn't face that and engage it, there is not going to be a solution. Because if you look at culture, they're not doing too good of a job. Look at Bruce Jenner, for crying out loud, getting praised for his identity crisis, his sexual identity crisis. All of this is a big deal. And I leave you with, he ended it with this conclusion. When you combine absent fathers, staying at home into early adulthood, video games, over-reliance on internet pornography, obesity, with the association of a lack of testosterone and increased estrogen levels in men and a lack of physical activity, education failure, joblessness, and a lack of opportunity for interaction, plus a women's movement that continues to empower that gender and thrust positive female role models into the economic and political arenas, you have the making for a screwed up masculinity with all the wider social consequences that implies. That's my sermon introduction. That's what the Lord totally was hitting me with this week. On the crest of Father's Day, when we know that fathers are just not getting the job done, and with it, fatherhood is just not celebrated these days, we have a growing problem. So what I want to do is I want to press into this morning. But I want to ask you ladies this, because it did touch on, his article did touch on the feminism movement and things like that. But let me just address you ladies this morning. I understand the issues that women are facing these days. Not as good as you do. I'm not claiming to, by no means. But I understand where ladies are coming from. My mom was divorced. Her husband, my biological father, was abusive to her, abusive to me. I could go deeper with that, but my mom forever carries certain scars from not having a man in the house, but having a male. You understand what I'm saying there? That you ladies know that there is a difference between a man and a male. Am I right? You understand very intuitively the difference between a guy and a man who loves and cares and cherishes for his family, sacrifices his self for his family, financially, physically, all the above. And women are sick of it. They're sick of little boys with chest hair and facial hair. They want and need men. And can I tell you this, that God does too? That God is not looking for males. God is looking for men. And what our culture needs, what our world needs, is not just more males. They need men. In the home, in the workplace, in this church and others. But not too many are rising to the occasion. And the church has to address it. And here's the deal. God does too. Now I want to go into the scriptures this morning, but I want to give you some background about the character that I want to address. We're going to touch on 3. So if you want to get your Bibles out, you can turn to 1 Chronicles 12, verse 32. We should have it on the screen in just a moment. I want to talk to you about the men of Issachar. What? Who has a car? Issachar. The men of Issachar. Now the men of Issachar were... I'll give you a little bit of background on them. Not much is known about them. They kind of play a very small role. Issachar was the 5th son of Jacob and Leah. I don't know if you remember those guys in the scriptures, Old Testament. He was the 9th son of the overall patriarch, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and all that. His name is derived from 2 Hebrew words. The first one meaning wages, the second one meaning hired. So his name literally means hired wages, hired worker. So Issachar was a guy who was a hard worker. His name derived from that. When Solomon, chiefly known, Solomon, when he was king, was putting administrative districts over Israel in the Old Testament. Issachar's territory was one of those that had independent princes. And when David was doing his numbers, numbering the 90,000, I don't know if you remember that in Scripture, when David was setting up Israel, it was growing, economic boom, everything was going well. He was taking 90,000 and he was distributing it out. And he took the men of Issachar and he put them into a supreme section because of their wisdom. They were known to be a people of wisdom. And in Chronicles chapter 12, verse 32, it says this about them. Now the sons of Issachar, who had understanding of the times, to know what Israel ought to do, their chiefs were 200. And listen to this. All the brethren were at their command. The men of Issachar had a distinct area of wisdom. Their wisdom was not just to see the signs of the times, but to know what to do about it. Now look, you can get on Twitter, you can get on Facebook, you can watch the news and see the signs of the times. I don't think I had to twist anybody's arm to say that masculinity is in deep, deep despair these days. I mean, some of us are talking about that over coffee in our homes. Some of us fear the influences with our children, our young boys. All of this. I don't have to twist your arm to get you to agree about it. But the chief problem is what do we do about it? The temptation is to shield your boys and girls and let your children not go out anywhere and all these things that are tempting to do. But none of it prepares boys and ladies, young children, and even ourselves on how to deal with the issue at hand. The chief desire and the need for us is to see the signs of the times and to know what to do about it. To know how to choose, to have men of supreme wisdom, men like the men of Issachar. See, this is what we need in our homes and in our churches and in the political arenas and in city councils and running businesses is men who are of that stamina, men who are of the tribe of Issachar, so to speak, who can step into arenas of influence and see and act accordingly. These men, the men of Issachar, were not males, they were men. They were men. They were the chief individuals who David said, if I'm going to put 90,000 people under the influence of anybody, it's going to be these boys from Issachar because of their wisdom. I want to give you a bad example and a good example this morning. In the book of Judges, chapter 14, I want to talk about two dads this morning. First one, we don't know the name of, but he was the father of Samson, right? Yeah. Guys get all kind of bowed up when we're talking about Samson. Yeah, Samson, man, ripping people in half and lions and stuff, beating jawbones, right? We all like Samson. Samson's the man. They haven't done a really good movie on him yet, but I'm sure it's coming. Samson had a father. I think there was one, but I think they all stunk. Judges 14. Now, Samson was a judge of Israel. Now, he never really held the office like he was supposed to, but more or less he acted on behalf of the people of Israel when they were in a real bad time, okay? Now, the thing with Samson is he was a Nazirite from birth. Now, a Nazirite was a vow that was normally taken voluntarily, but in his case, his parents were to take the Nazirite vow and insure it on his behalf. So from birth, he was never supposed to have a haircut, but I don't think he had a ponytail. He never had his hair cut, and he was never allowed to eat anything of the vine. So no grapes, raisins, cup of wine, none of that was at dinner. Couldn't social drink, all that jazz. He was not allowed, and he was never supposed to touch a dead thing, a dead body, never supposed to interact with one in that capacity. So that was the Nazirite vow in a nutshell. He was given to his mom prayed for a baby and was barren, and God moved in. Samuel came in and boom, he can do this. You're going to have a kid, but this is what God asks. So he was raised up a Nazirite. Now, because of that, in keeping that vow, he was insured with supernatural, superhuman strength. So he had a physique much like mine. And what is so funny about that? You guys aren't supposed to laugh. You're supposed to be like, yeah. Now, in all honesty, I think Samson probably looked a little weak. Because that would really give God a lot more credit than having a Hercules-type guy, right? Everybody, look at the skinny guy, carrying the gate up the mountain. For crying out loud, what's going on there? That must be from God. I just think he was probably like, a real thin, slender guy. So anyway, that's the scene, right? We got Samson's background. Now, here's the deal. There is a temptation in parenting today to raise our kids in such a fashion where they look good, that they don't embarrass us, that they dress the right way, they're not, all gnarly looking, and the guys don't wear makeup, and the girls wear dresses, and they look the part. They're good Christian kids. And in doing so, I read a book me and my wife did called The Dangers of Raising Nice Kids. And in it, basically, the author was saying, look, the goal is not supposed to be to just have kids who look the part. You've got to get to the heart. That was the issue, I believe, with Samson's father. I want to prove that to you as best I can. In Judges 14, now Samson went down to Timnah and saw a woman there of the daughters of the Philistines. So when he went up and told his father and mother, saying, I have seen a woman in Timnah of the daughters of the Philistines. Now, therefore, get her for me as wife. Now, the context here is this. All the good families had arranged marriages back then. You didn't go out and just pick your own wife because that's what the other guys did. If you were a reputable family, it was an arranged marriage. The parents had a good say in that, right? You know, it's still, that kind of exists today. You want the parents to be for it. You want the blessing of the parents. You want them to show up for the wedding. Mom and Dad, go get the woman. I want her. So you arrange this for me. Now here's the deal. The Jewish law said that you weren't supposed to do that. You weren't supposed to intermarry with the Philistines, with the uncircumcised. And the parents are not so weak-willed that they don't say something. Then his father said, and mother said to him, is there no woman among the daughters of the brethren or among the people that you must go and get a wife from the uncircumcised Philistines? And Samson said to his father, get her for me, she pleases me well. Look, Dad, remember who you're talking to here. It's me, Samson. Haven't you seen the wanted posters over there in the Philistine post office? I do bad stuff. You do what I say. Now, the father ends up going and they arrange the marriage for their son, Samson. Now, you'll see in the next verse that God was actually leveraging this and allowing this in some cases because he was going to use it to get the whole war with the Philistines going. But the case in point is not to get lost in the fact that Samson and his upbringing or his pride was a big issue. And here's the deal. I think when you look at this, that there is a parenting failure in some point here. I think that it could have happened, and this is just my opinion, but I think that the Christianese type thing kind of came in with Samson's parents. Why? They were so concerned with his vow not being broken, never cut his hair, keep scissors away. If you come to a birthday party at Samson's house, nobody brings scissors, okay? We're not going to do the whole dress-up thing and put Samson in a dress and cut his hair or anything like that. We're not going to mess with his hair. Nobody's allowed to bring grape juice to our house, okay? If the dog dies, Samson doesn't bury it. We're going to let Dad do it. They were so wrapped up in making Samson keep his vow that the vow never made its place in his heart. See, Samson ultimately was more of a man than his dad was. His father said something, but ultimately his dad didn't have to do what his son said. His dad could have said, no, me and Mom aren't doing this. If you're going to go off and do something against God's will, you go and do it. You may say, well, the Bible says that was God's permissive will. It wasn't his perfect one. God's plan was for Samson to be a man after God's own heart, to lead the people of Israel with integrity, not just really brute force, which is ultimately what he did. And today, we have the same problem in our households. Permissive parenting. Guys who have no spine, who will not lead their families well, who may say something, but when it comes down to it, they do not lead with integrity and strength in their homes. If they're even there at all. Disconnected fathers who'd rather look at a screen than look into the eyes of their kids. Failure, failure, failure. And what do we have in our culture? We have a culture of Samsons. They got the strength. They're man. They're masculine. They can go to war. They can bench press over 300 pounds. But they can't lead a family. They can't show up to work on time. They can't earn a living. But man, they're good at video games. This is not the way to lead homes. I want to give you a good example. In the book of Joshua, chapter 24, verse 14. Joshua, who took over the lead from Moses and ultimately was the alpha male, right, guys? Come on, the alpha male of the people of Israel. Joshua, military leader. Hoorah, right? I imagine in this scene that I'm about to paint for you, Joshua's a little bit older now. He has led the conquest of Canaan, taken the walls of Jericho down, defeated multiple armies, and basically has cleaned out the areas of the land. Did his job. I picture him with, because they didn't have the whole thing we do today, so he didn't have like an M4 strapped across him, but he probably had his sword in his hand, probably unlike Samson, probably had some bulging biceps because of the wars that he was fighting, maybe some scars across his face, and he stands up and he calls out the people of Israel. Listen to what he says. Now, Israel is about to have to go and do some things and take over the rest of the land. They were a unit, right? The whole nation going through, wiping out people, defeating armies. And now the goal was to send a tribe this way, a tribe this way, and a tribe this way to conquer the land, to finish it off, to finish what they started. There are cities over here, cities over here. They're pretty easy to beat. You might have a challenge, but go and finish the job. And where you go, you settle there. You raise your families. All's good. Serve God. Go for it. This is what he says. Now, therefore, he's talking to the people. He's talking to the men. He says, fear the Lord. Serve him with sincerity. Don't fake it. Don't play the part. Don't just go to church, guys. Follow the Lord with sincerity and in truth, and put away the gods which your fathers served on the other side of the river and in Egypt. Serve the Lord. And if it seems evil to you to serve the Lord, then you know what? Fine, just be real. But choose you this day who you will serve, whether it's the gods of your fathers that they served on the other side of the river, the God of the Amorites, and in whose land you dwell. You can do that. But as I'm holding my sword and flexing my muscles and I got my wife and kids next to me, as for me and my house, let me tell you what we're going to do. We're going to serve the Lord. Right? Guys, don't you just, I'm like, yeah, man, I want to be like that. Come on, give me a sword and put the wife and kids behind me. Be all looking pretty. The kids are holding their BB guns. And, yeah, come on, bring it, right? What does Joseph do? He calls out weakness. He says, look, if you're too sissy to serve God, we know it's hard. We know it's hard. It's a lot easier to stay home and sleep in on Sunday morning than go to church. I know it's hard to get up on Monday and go to work. But as for me and my house, my kids are going to have a roof. And I can look my kids in the eye and ask them with integrity what they're looking at on the internet. Because they know what I'm looking at. I can look at integrity into the eyes of my wife and know that her love tank is full. Because I sit and I spend the time and look into her eyes and say, honey, talk about your feelings. I know it's easier to watch the game on a Sunday. But as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. See, that's women, right? Ladies, how do you feel about Joseph right there? All of you ladies are smiling. You should see the women are like, yeah, man, that's what I'm after. Why? Because Joseph wasn't a male. Joseph was an alpha man. He couldn't just bench press 350 and squat 600, which I don't know if he could, but he probably could because the walls and anyway, Jericho. He was a man not just on the outside, but on the inside. See, it reached his heart. It didn't just reach the outside like Samson. It reached the inside. And this morning, if you want to transition from male to man, God, His Word have to reach into your heart. What does He call out on masculinity? What is the trick that He says to this? Serving God. He says, put away the other stuff. Put away your cell phones. Put away your video games. Stop watching masculinity and leave it. As for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. I am going to lead with integrity my family. And that's exactly what he did. So I want to ask you this, guys. Do you prefer to look at a picture of a woman that's airbrushed and all the flaws taken away, or are you willing to love the one that you have that might have a few flaws and imperfections, that might not look airbrushed, but your wife? Lady's like, what? What you talking about, preacher? Ain't no flaws here. I'm fine. You are. We ain't got an ugly one in the bunch. Guys, would you rather be at home or the office? Would you rather watch sports or playing with your kids in the yard? Would you rather be a strong man and work to make yourself, ladies, somewhat good looking for your wife? To have a man who's strong enough to protect her? Or would you rather play a first-person shooter and act like one on a screen? These are all questions that we have to answer ourselves. Now, I say this, there's nothing inherently wrong with video games or sports or anything like that. But when you begin to drift towards those and fail your family, you've committed an atrocity, because someone else is going to step in and raise them. I'm going to wrap this up with a couple of things here. I read another. I was at the camp, and he's known as Cowboy Bill. His name's Bill Bailey. I don't know if many of you know him. He was the preacher for the week at camp, and I was talking to him and Jameson. Actually, Jameson and him were talking, and I kind of walked up on it. But they were Cowboy Bill was telling him a story about something that I was so intrigued with that I had to go the next day and I had to find the information on this. In Africa, let me see if I can find the stats on that real quick and give you the skinny. There is a story about elephants, and it was in Africa, in southern Africa. The area of it was, where did it go? You're just going to have to trust me on it. I had the name of the preserve. There's an African preserve that, I just saw it. Ashkar, the Ashkar Preserve in Africa. This is fact. Okay? Got it. Found it on the internet. It's got to be right. No, this was a doctor who wrote this. In Africa, they had a problem with African elephants overpopulating in a specific reserve. Why? Because nobody was allowed to hunt there, and you can imagine. Over time, there was too many elephants, so they had to do something. So they decided, okay, we're going to move these elephants. Now, that's kind of hard to do because elephants are a little on the heavy side. So they retrofitted some helicopters with some harnesses and said, okay, we're going to move these elephants by helicopter over to these other preserves. Thin out the herd, solve the problem. So they did that. They began to move the elephants. But the problem was with the super huge male bull elephants. The older bull elephants were just too heavy. The harnesses kept snapping. The choppers had problems moving them. So, okay, we'll just move the younger males and the females, and we'll set it up in this other section of Africa. So they did that. Thin the herd, problem solved. Only a few months later, they began to find dead white rhinoceroses, also another endangered species. So these white rhinos were coming up dead in this African preserve. And they didn't know why. And they found out, they thought it was poachers, but then upon looking at them, they found tusked gores in these white rhinoceroses. So they set up cameras. Surely these elephants are not doing this. But after watching surveillance video, they found that these white rhinoceroses were being killed by elephants. Completely out of character for an elephant. Senseless killing. Not something elephants do. They tried to figure out what's the common denominator here. What would cause these elephants to do this? The only common denominator that was in the prior environment that was not in this one was the older, dominant alpha male bull elephants. So they said, well, they got some stronger choppers, got some stronger harnesses, and moved bull elephants to this area of South Africa. Overnight, problem solved. Problem solved. Why? Because the younger elephants didn't know how to be elephants. They acted naturally with their testosterone levels and male aggression and did senseless violence. But when the alpha male, bull elephants, the elephants of elephants were in the vicinity, they can snap those boys back into action. And what did they do? The younger males followed the older ones everywhere they went. They needed to see what it looked like to be a male. Now, in the article, you times that by 1,000 to our culture. Similar problem. Males acting out in aggression, testosterone levels to their max. And what are they doing? Literally, the writer talks about in the very zoo that they were also doing a similar thing with. They had video surveillance of young men, humans, acting out in aggression on camera with women in this zoo, advancing them sexually, mugging them. Why? Because we got a lot of males in our country, but not too many men. And because of the failure of the alpha males, the older, wiser, strong men showing themselves strong to the people, to the culture, to the home, we have a male society that's going crazy. So what are we doing as a culture? Are we looking for Joshua's? No, we're trying to fix the problem with policing. Now, how's that going these days? Police are having a pretty rough time, aren't they? See, prison and policing is not a substitution for a strong male role model in a home. And what you are going to see in our culture is it's going to get predominantly worse. Well, I think over the weekend there was an assault on a police office in Houston, Texas. Someone actually waged war on a police office. Shot it up, put bombs in front of it. Praise the Lord, nobody was hurt. But do you see where the culture is going? Men in crisis. The biblical solution. The biological solution. It's working with elephants, for crying out loud. Is to have strong men who will lead with integrity and with strength, and at times will push back at these young men whom we push back at. What does your home look like, men? The women in your life, they don't want a male. They want a man. You see, what God wants, what God needs, what women need and want are men, not males. And I guarantee you that the woman sitting next to you will confirm it. So what are you doing with your time? What are you doing with your entertainment? What's the level of your character look like? Are you parenting like Joshua, or are you parenting like Samson's father? Just trying to get the outward shell looking just right with your family. Or are you going to probe into the heart? Well, guess what? That's hard work. And it's exhausting, because I'm trying it too. And there are days when I'd much rather just look at a screen. But if my kids are going to turn out right, if I'm going to have Joshua's coming out of my home, some men of Issachar, man, what would it look like, men? If somebody said, those white boys, those Strattons, those Smiths, those Brooks, those are some wise men. If I'm going to put anybody in leadership over 90,000 people, it's going to be those boys. What's your reputation going to look like? What are those Collins boys going to be known for? What is your family going to be known for? Guess what? It's on you and it's on me. And your ladies will applaud your attempts. Now, ladies, you have to affirm what your men try and do this way. I'll say that. You have to affirm the attempts, not necessarily